A clanging hammer drops from the clock tower's ledge, shatters mid-air, sparks scattering like a hiccup in time. Villagers freeze in mirrored poses, faces twitching with unspoken memories. The boys below cannot scream. Any breath they draw returns as the bell's distant toll. And the shadow of that falling hammer already drags a woman toward the tower's warped staircase. Something is wrong with every heartbeat synced to those bells. The lane beneath the tower hums with its usual dozen carts, mules trudging through mud, the bakery's windows steam-smeared as ovens hiss. Boys with pouches of coal duck under ropes, hands brushing the stone wall that shivers faintly with every toll. Old Marta sells her ribboned herbs from the curb, nodding to commuters who glance up only long enough to time their steps between chimes. The bell tower has always been a metronome. Ticks in the air, the bell's round throat sounding every quarter hour. And today feels no different, at least until the hammer decides otherwise. The clockwright's apprentice, cheeks reddened by climb and kiln, wipes sweat with the back of his wrist and adjusts the ladder ropes, as if that might steady the metal gears already humming in his blood. Children chase pigeons from the plaza, scattering feathers and laughter. No one dares speak of the hammer yet, but no one stops for fear either. The lullaby of tags and trades continues its measured loop, bell after bell. The town's pulse resting on routine despite the mirrors, and the last toll has hung in everyone's eyes. The tavern smells of damp wool and spilled ale. I push through the door, while the clock tower outside goat stumbles across the square, its silence thicker up close. Marta looks up from counting coins at the far table. She hands me a mug without waiting for words. "Going to the clock again?" she asks with a crooked smile that never reaches her eyes. I ask about the last time the tower stopped. Marta wipes her hands on her apron, drops the rag into the sink, and leans across the bar. "It wasn't the clock stopping that scared us," she says. "It was what we all knew we'd done." She doesn't pause for me to answer. Her voice pulls the whole room in. 2 years ago, my boy Thomas swore he saw the hammer fall without a bell sounding. The stopped gears held the same hour the accusations flew about the harvest theft. People pointed fingers while the minute hand sat dead. When the hour struck again, Thomas had hung himself in the woods. The tower started up right then, like a curse lifted. It never stopped when we weren't pointing at each other, only when the guilt settled like snow. I scribble her words, trying not to let her stare cut through me. She lifts her chin toward me and hands me a small folded card. The handwriting is hers, shaky, hers. "Listen to what it says from Tomas," she says quietly. Inside is a short note. "Forgive me for the silence I kept. The clock stopped when I lied." Her fingers tremble as she smooths the paper back into place. When the boy's name hits the air, another patron hisses and turns away. The bell above the door jingles again. Etta the smith wipes grease from her arms and steps in. "You're telling people about the tower, aren't you?" In the forge's heat, Etta drags a bench next to my table. "My wife came to me the night it stopped for the wedding bell," she says, wrapping her leather-clad hands around a mug. The gears froze with the noise of her laughter still hanging in the air, right before the sudden thunder of prejudice from the town council. She presses her lips together until the skin goes white. No one would listen that she was a widow, not a thief. The clock stayed dead while we argued. By dawn, the council had made their decision, and Arlen was gone. She jerks a thumb toward the back of the tavern, where a door stands slightly ajar. I ask how she knows the stop followed the fight. She slams the mug down, splattering ale. "Because it happens when our fear makes us stop listening to each other," she snaps. "The gears won't move until we face what we're ashamed to say." The door opens wider, and Etta's youngest slips in, eyes darting. He rests a crude wooden toy on the counter and points to the tower through the window. It was halfway stopped when the thunder came. He blurts. Papa said the tower heard us shouting. It's like it knows when we hurt people. Etta scoops the boy into her arms. He hugs her while she whispers something under her breath. She pulls back and nods at me. Tell them you heard it from someone who lived it, she says. I leave the tavern with Marta's note burning a weight in my pocket and the boy's silent gaze following me. The bones of the tower loom in the misty air. And I know it isn't just curiosity anymore. The way the villagers talk about their own fears, the guilt they swallow when its hands stop. It feels like the tower keeps a ledger of regret. My pen still has ink from the tavern's spilled ale and something heavier. The knowledge that every stoppage is tied to a wound we keep laced shut. Outside, I hear the tower's faint grinding begin again, the gears clicking back like a weary breath. But the tension in the square remains. If I go up there, I can't pretend it's just for passing time. We huddle inside the circle of bronze railings, leaning on the frost-blackened stones framing the clock tower. Marta sits on the low wall, fingers tightening around the woven handkerchief Thomas left behind. Etta paces the cobble in short bursts, her boots grinding grit, while I keep my notepad tucked under my arm and my eyes on the second hand racing toward the 3. The street is already half empty. The chime has rung twice since dawn, but the townsfolk have learned to step back. When the hand slams into the numeral, I bark, "Brace!" to anyone within reach and spread my palms out like a makeshift anchor. The moment the gear teeth grind against the peg, the tower groans, the pendulum dragging backward. Sound collapses into a hush. Marta's breath hiccups halfway through a gasp. Her knees buckle, and she lurches toward me as if a rope yanks her spine. Her head jerks sideways, and her own voice screams in her throat, the words from the square when Thomas was accused. She claws at her face, nails scratching, whispering, "You took the bread." The sentence stuttering. Her eyes snap to the left, to the same crooked beam she swore she would never forget. But now her body is there, twisted back into that night. Etta lunges, gripping Marta's wrist and pressing her palm flat so her fingers can't scratch. Marta's jaw clenches. She fights to stand, and then she jerks forward again, as though dragged through mud. The clock has not moved yet. The hands hover between the 3 and the 4, reversed, digging steps back into the hour. Another scream, Joran, the cooper, shoots through the fog. His shoulders fold inward. He bends and presses his head against the stone, eyes wide and unseeing. I feel his ribs heaving like a horse that can't breathe. He shouts fragments, "Counsel!" They say I sold shoddy barrels. Liar! The accusations loop around my ears while he flings fists at the empty air, fingers twitching without landing. He keeps reaching for the painted crest over the council door, the same crest Etta remembers from the argument when her wife vanished. The hand slides backward again, and when Joran's fist misses the crest and slaps my shoulder, I clamp my arm around his throat, not choking, just pressing, a brace against the pull. Etta shoves her forehead into his back and screams, "Look at me!" Marta's voice is a rasp now. "It was the silver cup," she hisses, her face flooding with the heat of that night she was accused of stealing Tomas's wages. The floor feels like it bends under us. The air smells like wet hay and torch burn. Joran keeps flinging, and each time he lands into me, he rattles words he swore he would never say. When the bell finally drags over the tooth of its peg, the second hand slips forward and sound returns like rushing water. Marta collapses against the stone, panting, forehead pressed into her folded arms. Joran staggers, eyes still dilated, babbling. "Council had the fireball, everyone's eyes." The tower stops trembling. The hand resumes, slow and steady, while both clutch the railings to steady their legs. Etta slides down beside Marta and presses her head against Marta's shoulder. "He called you a thief," she mutters, breathing hard. like the night the clock stopped for the council argument. Marta nods, pointing at the wall with twitching fingers. He said Thomas took the cup. She insists, ragged. Joran wipes his forehead and points toward the tower's lower face. It pulls me back to the night of the spilled tar, he says, slow but clear. Eyes everywhere, accusing me for a crack in a barrel I didn't make. I wipe sweat from my brow and open the notepad. The words Marta and Joran repeat are the same accusations that filled the square before the stops. But now, they are not hearsay. They are full, hellish scenes they live through again. The pain is fresh in their bodies. I jot down the phrases and the way the hands reversed before the stop. Because if these memories come with the halt, they might come with the next stopping point, that tiny promise that we can list what the rewound hour holds. Gives me something like relief. A sketch of a map from nightmare to the place where we can grip the tower and refuse to be yanked back. The square fills before the clock completes its slow swing to noon. I drag the metal stool closer to the base, pressing my palms flat against the cold stone as Marta and Etta take their places beside me. Marta keeps her fingers curled around the strap of her basket, as though it were a lifeline. Etta lets her knees bend loose, eyes shining toward the tower. Nora, the baker who usually hides earth in her apron pockets, stands behind them with a rag-wrapped loaf, as if the weight of the bread might keep her steady. I point to the minute hand as it limps past 12 and say it again. Say Thomas was blamed. Marta swallows and drags her breath low. They said he stole the salt, she spits, and the clock sighs. The hand shudders, slows, then slides backwards a fraction before slamming into stillness at 12:17. Nora's face goes white. She steps forward, catching Marta's elbow with a sharp grip. The stone around me thrums. The villagers jerk backward, not because gravity changed, but because the tower drags their spines along someone else's memory. I grab Marta's wrist and slam my other hand against the wall so the momentum has somewhere to land. The minute hand stops exactly on the accusation. They gasp the accusations out in pieces, and each time a new wound is named. Etta's outcry about the council blaming her missing wife. Nora whispering that the night she did not speak up, the boy drowned. The hand responds, sliding back before freezing. The pattern is no longer theory. It is a beat we can hear. With every sentence, the air trembles. When the minute hand stands still, the villagers lurch, words spilling from their mouths in the rhythm before. When it moves, their bodies follow forward, even if they still breathe in the old anger. I grab Etta's shoulder as the next stop comes. Her mouth opens, the words jagged. They called her witch. The hand jerks backward, then clanks into stillness at 12:22. Etta bends forward, fingers clawing into my coat. The rhythm swells, the chime choking as though it wants to join the accusation. I hold her steady, feeling her pull against the pause, and shout, "Let it go now." Not because I think it is over, but because I know the stop will come as long as we stay on that note. Nora, who had been silent, thrusts her arm forward, palm flat on the stone, and says, "I saw them point at her lips and believe them." This is the emotional peak. The tower freezes, the villagers sag, and I am the fulcrum keeping them upright. Marta's voice breaks in with, "He couldn't have stolen." The minute hand quivers. Then, slowly, like a breath after a scream, inches forward again. We have seen it pause each time a new unresolved memory is named. And we have felt the pull of that same pause in our arms and the stone we press against. "Now we know," Marta says, wiping her cheeks with the back of her wrist, and the hands keep moving. The clock tower may still reverse, but we have learned the beat it follows With every accusation, we repeat. That knowledge stays, a small reward nestled between tension and relief. My thumb digs into the carved glyph on the tower's face as the minute hand winds slowly around the same nick it has used since we first felt the freeze. Nora crouches beside me, the hem of her skirt jammed under the lowest step so she can throw her weight against the stone, and Marta's knuckles are white on the rope we looped through the iron ring. The hand moves only when we force the accusation and the sliver of release out of them together. That short, steady tick is our payment for doing this dance again. Burke bursts out of the shadow of the bakery oven, arms windmilling, wanting to grab the rope and shake it free. "Stop!" he shouts. "Stop making me!" The second he snaps, the air thickens, and we all lurch backward. His breath turns to a rasp. He is already in the same place the clock remembers. "You stole from me," he starts, and the words slam into the moment just like they did the first night his father's harvest vanished. He tries to wrap a new sentence around it. "I never saw you." But the tower drags him back into the same accusation from the same fear. He cannot finish any different line. Each syllable drips with dread, and we feel the millisecond before the hands reverse, a bite of metal air pinning everyone in place. I yank Burke's shoulder tight against the stone. "Say the accusation," I spit, "and then say the ledger was yours again." He bites his lip, eyes wild, but the words wobble. "You stole from me." Pause. He sucks in air. "I kept the ledger and let it go," he forces, voice cracking on the last word. A plea to the thing that keeps spinning. The minute hand trembles, loosens, and for the first time since the rewind grabbed us, it pushes forward. The second hand whirls for a breath. That little spin is like a breath exhaled. Not salvation, but a tiny space where we are not fully rewound. Marta releases the rope for the length of the tick, so the strain eases for a second. That is tonight's reward. A steady tick and a second hand that thinks it can move again. Burke slumps against me. The same accusation still stuck in his throat, the same fear still dripping from his eyes. He tried to step away, to toss in new words, but his body kept lurching back to that moment with Thomas's ledger. The loop gives him nothing new. It only gives him a chance to say the same line again, to feel the same fall. We are still caught in that drop. I see 70% of the pattern in my notepad, the rest smudged by fear and stone dust. But tonight, we pry the minute hand forward for a heartbeat. The fear remains. The release stays a fragment, not a cure. We will hang on to this tick like a coin for the next person to trade for another second of motion. Rain spat from the tower's face, needle thin and cold. The minute hand wavered above us, shivering whenever someone faltered, as if tasting the same old accusation and tugging back into the gears. I pressed my shoulder into the stone, letting its chill anchor me while Nora gripped my other wrist like we were connected by rope. "Accusation," I said, breathing into the cadence we forced. "You took the ledger, Thomas." Marta's fingers dug into my forearm. She opened her mouth, but the tower snagged on the moment before the words escaped. A shudder rolled through the plaza. The cobblestones beneath Marta's boots bloomed into mud, then river-slick boards, the drowning boy's dock. Rotten water slid up her calves and burrowed into the present, stealing her breath. The minute hand trembled, refusing to move. "Keep her here," I barked, digging my nails into rough stone. "Accusation, release." The tower answered with the same force that pulled households into nightmares. A violent backward lurch, a second of gray static where Edda's wife's voice cracked with the council's fury. Nora, already trembling, cut in. "He was blamed for the ledger. Then we let go of the blame." and the minute hand nudged forward an inch, just enough for Marta's boots to feel cobbles again. I saw her eyes tear, not from sadness, but effort. Her pupils flicking between the present and the dock that wanted her back. The rain turned into artillery fire when Burke stepped out. He held the ledger's charred remnant like a shield. The moment he opened his mouth to change the line, the tower grabbed hard, shoving him into a memory where the whole square shouted over him. His gut tightened, breath stuttered, and the stone hummed. I twisted back and hauled him into the light. The clock's hands swung backward, as if reaching inside him. He spat the original accusation, voice shredded by the pull. "The ledger was stolen," he repeated, even though every fiber of him wanted to say something different. The tower tightened. Wind rasped through the air. Shadows of past speakers waded through the rain, their lips synchronized with the accusations. The present flickered. The baker's stall vanished, replaced by the gutter that soaked Thomas the night before his jump. That's when the truth hit clearer than before. This was not a temporal glitch. The loops weren't offering choices anymore. They were a sinkhole, an irresistible drag toward whatever trauma lodged in each heart. And whenever someone wrenched free, the stone itself tried to swallow them back, erasing a piece of now. I shouted, "Accusation! Release!" Tomas didn't take it. We accused him before we looked. I could feel the tower suck at those words, almost tearing them from me. Marta's hands curled around the stone until her knuckles went white. Nora's mouth opened, and for a heartbeat the rain stood still. A strand of memory tried to slip through, a shadow of Edda's wife screaming, but Nora slammed it down with the release. We stopped listening, and that stopped the clock. The minute hand moved again, this time a full inch forward. The second hand, spinning so fast, its blur made the rain stitch lines in the air. The payoff came with the second spinning wildly for the first time since the halt. And the villagers took that burst of motion like a gust of air. Burke, still choking on the loop, gritted his teeth as the hands pulled him forward. The rain changed tone, now sharp but consistent, matching the clock's new pace. We weren't free, no. But the brief forward surge proved the loops weren't only pulling us back. They were using our words, our anchors, to tug on us again and again. The truth settled between us. The stone didn't just rewind bodies. It forced consciousness toward trauma, eroding whatever was left of now every time it lured us in. We stayed rooted, repeating accusation release on a loop, chasing that steady motion for the tiniest sliver of present, even though every effort left deeper grooves in the reality we stood on. Still, the minute hand ticked on. That small motion, tiny as a whispered denial, became our momentary victory, proof we could skirt the edge a fraction longer before the tower clenched again. The crowd kept coming, drawn by the low rumble of the gears that still remembered how to hold a breath. I planted my back against the stone, aware of the quiet, cold pressure that collects whenever the plaza drifts toward panic. When the next villager stepped forward, each pair of eyes on me, their fear wasn't a murmur anymore. It was a tightening coil around the plaza itself. Whoever drew breath in that circle made the loop constrict, and I felt it as a shudder in the air, a sudden ache behind my ribs. The more they feared the tower, the tighter the loop became. When a mother in a ragged shawl whispered, "What if it comes back to Tomas?" the world squeezed in until the paving stones almost touched my boots. I pulled Luca the baker away from the crowd and forced him to sit on the cold stairs. His fingers fumbled for the ledger, hands shaking like flour dust in the wind. "Say it," I said, grabbing his wrist. "Say the accusation and then say something else. Anything else, even if you choke on it." He coughed. The minute hand quivered as if listening, the second hand locked, waiting. Luca slid his gaze to the frozen face of the clock and hissed, "I told Thomas he stole the flower." The stones shivered around us, the loop pulling inward, and the crowd's fear thinned the air until our breaths tasted metallic. I pressed my forehead to his shoulder, forced the words out of him. I let him go. And the minute hand picked up a single, desperate turn. Someone in the circle cried out, and the loop spasmed tighter, the cold air snapping like a rope. Nora stepped forward before panic took over. I wrapped my arms around her waist, wove my fingers through Marta's, and we all leaned against the stone so hard it creaked. The tower answered with a lurch. The plaza folded into the memory of the council room, the same heavy scent of accusation. Every new fear from the edge of the crowd starved the present. People swallowed their breath, gripping us so fiercely their knuckles went white. A scream from the back broke the moment. The loop shot inward, pinching us until our ears rang. I shouted over it, "Name it and let it go." Nora's voice came out sharp and raw. "You accused my wife of stealing council votes, and you let me stand alone." The air snapped. She dragged the release out by gasping, "But I forgive her strength." And the second hand spun. Just once. Enough to see hope in its blur. The plaza shivered, then settled for a breath. The loop had tightened around us like a fist, but we forced it to stretch its fingers open for that split second. We needed more than fleeting motion. Fear rose at the edges of the crowd, a tide that would crush us if we let it freeze us again. I barked orders, anchor, repeat, push past the instinct to flee. Each new accusation, each desperate release, condensed the loop further, but we kept pushing outward. The minute hand moved again, the second hand wavered, and even as panic tried to drag us backward, we kept more bodies connected to the stone. The revelatory payoffs were small, half a tick forward, a brief spin, but they tasted like breath stolen back from drowning. The loop still tightened with each new fear, but in those brief moments we carved out, we proved it could be slowed. Yet the clock tower kept pulling, and the ambiguity of where it would squeeze next still hung over us, unsolved and raw. The plaza shivers. Stone bites into palms as the tower begins its weak, weighted turn again. The minute hand drags forward a breath, the second hand flares like a trapped moth. Then the whole tower convulses, and the air yanks them back into the council chamber's glare. Dust is ash of old accusations. The walls sweat blame, and the villagers, held fast, lift their voices once more. Marta's words bruise the silence with Thomas's name. Edda's with the edge of that night. Nora's with the hush after her own release. Each accusation, each fragment of letting go, stitches a moment of motion, only so the tower may gather it and stretch the loop tighter. There is no escaping the rewind. The hands stall and reverse, dragging them through the same tremors of fear. Yet in the space between every forced echo, the group holds hands and watches the world lurch like a beast caught in its own teeth. They taste the metal tang of the tower's breath, feel the stone's slow warmth where they press. When the freeze sets in one last time, there is no breaking free, but their voices, raw and steady, travel through the loop and settle around them like a benediction that needs no answer. The clock tower does not relent. Its loops carve deeper, shaping each moment into the grief that built it. And still, with the knowledge of its unyielding hunger, they keep speaking to keep the hands moving, even as the air pulls them backward again and again.